My name is Sable Hartwell, 35 years old. Savannah wears celebration like perfume, sweet, a little dizzying, and hard to wash off. That night, the ocean threw back the moonlight just right, and the private room at the seaside restaurant glowed like money loves to glow, champagne towers, a band playing standards that made every ego feel important, waiters making constellations out of oysters. My parents, Marla and Ed, held court at the center, toasting my younger sister Dawn like she'd invented 30. I watched her twirl under the soft gold lights in a dress she'd never have to pay for, my mother's hands pressed together in fervent admiration, my father's laugh, carrying to the far wall. I'd been the family's invisible ATM for so long, I could recite the rhythm of it. They'd order extra dessert. They'd forget their wallets. They'd say, "Sable, you're so good with numbers," which in our house meant, "Sable, pick up the bill." No one ever called it a tradition because traditions imply consent. The band slid into Dawn's favorite song. My mother leaned toward me, breath warm with French 75, and said, "We went a little overboard, but she deserves it." It was a line she used when she bought Dawn a convertible the year I opened my firm and got a congratulatory shrug. Deserve is elastic when you're not the one paying. The check arrived in a leather sleeve like a secret. The server set it in front of me. Not my father, not my mother, not the guest of honor. I let it sit, perfectly still, the way you do with a snake until you're sure where the head is. Dawn's friends chanted, "Speech, speech," and she obliged, thanking Mom and Dad for always believing in me, like money and belief were synonyms. I slid the bill toward my father and said lightly, "Birthday girls shouldn't have to think about checks, and neither should their sisters." Then I added, "Because I've learned that clarity is more merciful than politeness. I'm not paying." Silence recalibrated the room. The band didn't stop, but it felt like it did. My mother's smile cracked at the edges. My father's eyes narrowed into the old lecture I'd been assigned since childhood. "How dare you disturb the peace we purchased?" Dawn blinked at me as if I'd forgotten my cue. "You're joking," she said, waiting for the laugh track that never came. "I'm done funding favors disguised as family," I said. My voice was steady, sharp enough to cut only what needed cutting. "Tonight is on the people who planned it." Ed pinched the bridge of his nose. "Don't make a scene, Sable." The scene was the expectation. Marla's voice lowered into that thin, dangerous kindness. "Sweetheart, you know how tight things have been. We wanted to give Dawn a night she'll remember." "She will," I said. "So will I." The leather sleeve found its final home in front of my father. He stared at it like it had betrayed him. Dawn flushed, red climbing her chest. "You always do this," she snapped. "You make everything about you." I wanted to laugh, but didn't. For years, I'd been so good at disappearing that the first time I took up 1 inch of space, it felt to them like I'd taken the whole room. I stood, placed my napkin across the tablecloth, and kissed my mother's cheek. "Stop sending bills to the daughter you forgot to raise," I said, softly enough that only the four of us could hear. Then I walked out into the salt air before anyone could turn outrage into words. Savannah at night pretends to forgive you. The waves said nothing. That was the most honest part. 3 days later, I sat in my father's home office because habits don't break as quickly as hearts do. I'm a CPA, my curse and my shield. For years, I'd handled their tax prep. Shoeboxes of receipts, a desk that looked like it was losing a losing battle with paper, and the old green banker's lamp my father swore made him think better. He'd made a show of offering to find another professional this year. I made a show of ignoring him. I sorted statements into neat little towers, utilities, brokerage, mortgage on the small bungalow they still somehow called modest. At the bottom of a pile, my fingers found heavy paper stock, the kind that thinks it's important. Family trust agreement stamped across the top in courthouse font. I paused. I'd never seen this. The trust named 3 co-trustees, Marla Hartwell, Edwin Hartwell, and Sable Hartwell. My breath caught in that small, clean way before panic decides who it belongs to. The only listed asset was a colonial on the coast appraised at 1 point something. The exact square footage of Dawn's laughter online. The provisions were plain. Co-trustees must consent to major transactions. Property transfers require unanimous written approval. Unanimous, written, approval. I thumbed through addenda and found it. A property transfer consent form attached to the trust's purchase paperwork. 3 lines for 3 signatures. My parents' loops and angles I knew by heart, and then mine, Sable A, Hartwell, printed neatly, followed by a signature that looked like someone had studied me, then performed me. It was too careful. It didn't lift where I lift. It didn't soften where I soften. My stomach went cold. I wasn't asked, I wasn't told, I was impersonated. Outside the office window, an egret stood in the marsh, like an exclamation point no one wanted to earn. In the hall, I heard my mother humming as she folded laundry that never belonged to me. I flipped to the back of the binder and found a calendar clipped to a final page. A date circled in my mother's tidy hand, the week after Grandma Mildred's funeral. My name appeared below it in a note that read, "All set." All set. For whom? In my lap sat a trust I co-managed without consent, tied to a house I never touched, built with money I couldn't yet see. Numbers don't lie. People do. I pressed my thumb against the ink of my forged signature until the top layer of paper warmed under my skin. I should have felt rage. Instead, I felt a terrifying clarity, the kind that makes you grateful for air because everything else is about to change. I stacked the documents back in order, from lie to legend to ledger, and slid the binder into my bag. If my parents had counted on my obedience, they had miscounted. On my way out, my mother called from the kitchen, all starch and sweetness. "Taking work home again?" For once, I said, "It's mine." I didn't look back to see her face. I didn't need to. I had proof, and I had time, and both were finally on my side. In the car, I laid the trust agreement on the passenger seat, buckled it in without thinking, and stared at the 2 most dangerous words in my family's vocabulary, co-trustee. They made me a guardian so I wouldn't guard. They gave me a title so I wouldn't ask for the truth. I turned the headlights on even though it was still daylight and drove toward the storage shed behind the house, the place where our secrets had always gone to sweat. Because if there was one forged stroke with my name on it, there would be more ink where that came from. The shed behind my parents' house always smelled like cut grass and old decisions, tin roof, warped door, a pull chain light that flickered like it was deciding whether to help me or not. My shoes sank into the dust-soft floor as I stepped past lawn chairs with sunburns, a dented cooler, boxes labeled Christmas that never stayed closed. Spiders had done better filing here than my father ever did. The pull chain steadied. In the far corner, half hidden under a quilt of tarp and neglect, sat a small, rusted safe, footlocker style, thick hinges, the kind of stubborn that makes you want to prove a point. I knelt, wiped off the grime with the sleeve of a sweater I didn't care about, and tried the handle. Locked, of course. I stood, scanned the shelves, and found the crowbar my father swore no one ever put back in the right place. "First time for everything," I muttered, wedging the bar into the seam. Metal complained. My shoulder complained back. The hinge surrendered with a sound like a throat clearing at church, scandal and relief. Inside, a sediment of years. Yellowed bills, utility stubs, envelopes with Grandma's tidy loops, a bundle of bankbook pages bound with twine, and near the bottom, a manila folder, thick with intent. On the tab, in Grandma Mildred's hand, Sable, Savings Fund. Something in my chest stood up. I slid the folder out and opened it with the careful urgency of a bomb tech. The top document was a simple contract, no-nonsense language, courthouse stamps, establishing a designated savings fund for the sole benefit of my granddaughter, Sable Hartwell, to support her education, business endeavors, and future housing. Signed 10 years ago. The amount, substantial enough to bend a life in a different direction, was circled, then gently underlined in Grandma's blue pen. I could see her sitting at her kitchen table, glasses perched low, writing "for Sable" like a spell. Underneath lay passbook entries, deposits laddered steady and clean. Notes in the margins. Keep this for her, not for them. A letter, folded twice. I lifted it out. The paper was soft from being important. "Sweet girl, if you're reading this, it means your granddaddy and I are no longer around to fuss at your parents for you. Consider this my fuss. This fund is for your dreams, not theirs. Use it to build your own place in the world, and don't let anyone shame you for wanting something that belongs to you. Grandma M." The words hit someplace money can't reach. I steadied my breath, then went back to the folder. Tucked behind the letter was a transfer agreement dated the week after Grandma's funeral, same week my mother had circled all set on the trust calendar. The document redirected the entirety of my savings fund into the newly created family trust as seed capital for the acquisition of residential real estate. 2 signatures at the bottom, Marla Hartwell and Edwin Hartwell. No line for me, no consent. I checked the routing details, the timestamps. Everything matched the day I stood in black and watched my mother cry, the kind of tears that make you think sorrow is a kind of honesty. That night, she'd pulled me into the kitchen and said, "We'll handle all the paperwork. You just grieve." And I had. They had too, just in a different direction. I flipped to the attached memo paper clipped to the transfer. A single line in my father's block letters. Cleaner this way. Cleaner for whom? I sat back on my heels, the cold of the floor rising through denim. I thought of every time I'd told myself fairness was a luxury, every time I'd squinted at their choices and called it family. They hadn't just favored Dawn. They'd laundered my future into her present and called it love. The pull chain light flickered again. I reached back into the safe and kept going. More receipts. A handwritten ledger in Grandma's script tracking deposits to Sable's account. Her neat columns, her steady math. The last entry in her hand. Promise me you won't let them make this small. Under it, my mother's notation in pencil, added later, "See trust file," with an arrow pointing to nothing because the trust file wasn't in here. It was on my passenger seat, buckled like a witness. Rage is easy. It burns off. What settled in me was older, something like grief, dressed as resolve. They had my name on their papers. I had their signatures on mine. Numbers don't lie when they're written by the dead. I tucked the documents into my bag. Fund contract, passbooks, the transfer redirect, Grandma's letter. Outside, the marsh sigh had turned to a hush. On the way to the door, I paused and scanned the shelves one more time. An old tin held keys, skeletal, modern, unlabeled. I pocketed 2 because if there's one lesson trust law and family both teach, it's that you should never be shut out of what bears your name. Back in my car, I laid the folder beside the trust binder. The 2 stacks looked at each other like opposing counsel. On the drive home, memory curated itself. Dawn at 16, posting photos from the convertible with the caption, "Manifested." Me at 28, signing a lease on a space for my firm while my mother asked whether I'd be too busy to help with taxes now. The year I hosted Christmas, roast, candlelight, a table set like I was auditioning for belonging, only for my parents to leave early because Dawn was too stressed to attend. My father's laugh across the restaurant table, warm as a coat he didn't offer, the leather check sleeve sliding to me again and again, as if I were a slot built for it. I pulled over at an overlook where the river widens and looks like it's thinking about being the sea. I opened Grandma's letter in the failing light and read the last line aloud. "Don't let anyone shame you for wanting something that belongs to you." The water kept moving, so did I. At home, I turned my dining table into a small courtroom. Laptop open, scanner humming. I digitized everything, naming files like I was writing history. 01, trust agreement. 02, forged consent. 03, Sable fund contract. 04, Yum transfer redirect. 05, Grandma letter. I backed them up to 2 drives, because trust once lost will teach you redundancy. Then the work I know best, law adjacent. I pulled Georgia statutes on co-trustees, consent requirements, fiduciary duty. Highlighted provisions about unanimous approval and the non-delegable duty of loyalty. I drafted a neat list titled Questions for Counsel and a second titled Requests for Accounting, bank statements, escrow ledgers, maintenance invoices, property tax receipts, any disbursements to or for the benefit of Dawn. I added a third, potential breaches. The clock slid past midnight. My phone lit with a message from my mother, Sunday dinner, as if the universe were testing my ability to compartmentalize. I silenced the screen and kept reading. When exhaustion finally loosened its hold, I clicked the desk lamp off and sat in the dark, letting the room calibrate around me. Somewhere in the building, a neighbor's laugh cracked open, then softened. A train horn sounded 2 neighborhoods over. I pressed my palm to the stack of copies, felt the warm ghost of the scan bed beneath. They had counted on my loyalty to hide their ledger. They had sewn my name into their scheme and expected me to be flattered by the fit. Tomorrow I would call Vanessa. I would call a probate attorney who owed me a favor. I would send a certified letter that did not apologize for existing. I would stop calling theft by its family nickname. For tonight, I whispered into the room, into the paper, the ink, the air. Mine. The word didn't echo, it rooted. When morning came, I was already sitting at my desk, coffee cooling beside a color-coded binder, my printer exhaling the last page of the demand letter I'd spent half the night drafting. The language was deliberate, professional, factual, lethal in its calm. Pursuant to my legal rights as co-trustee under Georgia statute, I hereby request immediate reimbursement of funds originally designated by Mildred Hartwell for my benefit, which were diverted without consent into the acquisition of 327 Ocean View Lane. In the absence of repayment or accounting within 10 business days, I will move to liquidate the trust property to correct fiduciary breaches. No emotion, no exclamation marks, just precision, the only weapon my parents ever underestimated. I printed 3 copies, signed in blue ink, and sealed them in certified mail envelopes addressed to 1. Marla Hartwell, 2. Edwin Hartwell, Don Hartwell Murphy. Then I sat back and watched the printer light blink, as if asking, "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said aloud. Mom called first, 2 days later, right before dinner hour, when she knew I'd still answer out of habit. "How could you do this, Sable?" she began, voice trembling with righteous horror. "You're threatening legal action against your own family?" "I'm requesting what's mine," I said evenly. "You're destroying us," she snapped. "Your father's blood pressure was fine when you forged my signature," I cut in. "You don't get to weaponize concern now." The silence that followed was dense enough to taste. Then the pivot. "You've always been so ungrateful. We gave you everything." "Correction," I said softly. "You borrowed everything that was meant for me." She hung up before I could finish. Dad's call came that night, colder. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You don't know what you're doing." "Dad," I said, "I've read the documents. I do know what I'm doing." "Lawyers will eat you alive," he said. "You'll regret dragging the family name through court." I almost laughed. "You dragged it through fraud first." Then, quietly, I added, "This isn't about money anymore." That part must have scared him because he didn't respond. Just breathed, then ended the call. By day 4, my phone was a siren of notifications. Calls, texts, guilt bombs disguised as family concerns. Then, one message stopped me cold. Patrick Murphy, Dawn's husband. "Hey, Sable, got your letter. I think we need to talk." Patrick, the quiet type at family dinners. A finance guy, detail-oriented, allergic to drama. I didn't expect an ally, but I answered. "Did you know," I asked, "that your house is owned by a family trust I co-manage?" A pause, then slowly, "What?" "They used my inheritance, Grandma Mildred's fund, to buy it." They said the trust was something they set up for Dawn's security," he said. "I didn't know you were involved." "Legally, I should have approved the purchase," I said. "They never asked." Patrick exhaled, low and sharp. "Send me the documents." That night, I emailed him the trust paperwork, the transfer, the forged consent. Within 10 minutes, he replied, "This isn't just unethical, it's illegal. I'm so sorry, Sable, I didn't know." It was the first apology I'd heard from anyone in this family in over a decade, and it hadn't even come from blood. The next day, a new number appeared on my caller ID, Office of Richard Lane, Attorney at Law. "Ms. Hartwell," a steady male voice said, "I was the attorney for your grandmother's estate. Your letter reached me through a colleague. I think you should see something." "What is it?" "Your grandmother left a will," he said. "A will your parents never probated." My pen froze midair. I thought the trust replaced it. "It didn't," he said. "The trust was separate. The will names you as the sole beneficiary of a property, a small seaside shop in downtown Savannah, and a separate account set aside for your personal use." I felt the air thin. "And my parents?" "They told the court there were no remaining assets," he said quietly, "but the records show otherwise." I gripped the phone tighter. "You're sure?" "I have certified copies. I'll send them to you today." When we hung up, my hands were shaking, not with fear, but with clarity. Every piece of the puzzle was sliding into place, spelling out what I had refused to believe. They hadn't just hidden money. They'd buried me. The documents arrived 2 days later, crisp, official, devastating. Grandma's handwriting was all over the margins. Notes about the shop she'd loved, reminders for me to keep a little nest egg for freedom. She'd seen it all coming. The favoritism, the manipulation, the rewriting of fairness into obligation. And she'd tried to protect me. The will's final clause was underlined twice. This gift is made directly to Sable Hartwell. It is not to be merged with any trust, fund, or shared estate. They had ignored it completely. I stared at that line until the ink blurred. Grandma hadn't just left me money. She'd left me proof. By the time Dawn called, the fight had already shifted from moral to existential. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice tight. "Mom's crying every night. Dad says you're trying to take my house." "I'm asking them to return what wasn't theirs," I said. "You're blowing everything up. They did what they had to do." I almost laughed. Funny how what they had to do always meant what benefits you. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking. "They were just trying to keep the family together." I took a deep breath. Then why did they need to forge my signature to do it? Her silence was my answer. Finally, she whispered, "You've always been jealous." "No," I said, "just tired." And I hung up. That night, I met Vanessa, my lawyer friend, at a small wine bar by the river. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything: the forged signature, the savings fund, the will. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "You have them cornered, Sable. But the hardest part isn't proving you're right. It's surviving being right." "What do you mean?" "Families like yours don't admit guilt. They rewrite history until you look like the villain." I nodded slowly. "Then I'll stop letting them hold the pen." She smiled, raising her glass. "Then it's time for part 2, accountability." I clinked my glass against hers, the sound crisp, final. "I'm ready," I said. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. The conference room smelled like cold coffee and quiet wars. Polished oak table, blinds drawn against Savannah's noon sun, every light overhead just a little too bright, the kind that makes it impossible to pretend. On one side sat my parents. Marla in her pearls and denial, Ed with his jaw set like a closed ledger. Next to them, Dawn, pale but defiant, twisting the clasp of her designer purse like it owed her an apology. Beside me sat Vanessa, calm, crisp, her legal pad open but untouched. And at the far end, Mr. Lane, Grandma Mildred's old estate attorney, there to confirm that everything I'd uncovered was true. This was it, the reckoning table. I laid the binder on the wood between us, opening it like evidence in court. The papers inside fanned out with the weight of betrayal and proof. "This," I said quietly, sliding the first set forward, "is the transfer that redirected Grandma's savings fund, the one meant for me, into the trust that bought Dawn's house." Mom's face tightened. "We've already discussed this, Sable." "No," I said. "You deflected it. Discussion requires honesty." Dad sighed, leaning back. "You're making this sound malicious. We did what we thought was best for both of you." "Then why," I asked, turning the page, "is my signature forged on this consent form?" The air snapped. Marla blinked too fast. Dawn froze. Ed's eyes darted to the paper and back to me. "That's your handwriting," he said finally, his tone defensive but uncertain. "No, it's not," I said. "I sign 1,000 documents a year. I can tell when someone imitates my pen." Mr. Lane cleared his throat softly. "She's correct. I reviewed it. It's a reproduction. The strokes are unnatural, likely traced." For a moment, no one spoke. Even Vanessa didn't breathe. Mom's voice trembled first. "We didn't think you'd mind. It was for family." I laughed. Not cruelly, but like a sound that had waited 35 years to exist. "You forged my consent, took my inheritance, and bought Dawn a house. You didn't think I'd mind?" Dawn slammed her hand on the table. "Stop making me the villain. I didn't know." "Then start acting like you want to," I snapped. She flinched but didn't argue. Vanessa leaned forward, voice measured. "My client has been more than patient. Legally, she's entitled to full reimbursement for the diverted funds, plus damages for breach of fiduciary duty. But she's willing to settle this privately if we can agree to immediate repayment and formal acknowledgement of her rights." Mom scoffed. "She's blackmailing her own parents." "No," Vanessa said smoothly. "She's holding them accountable." Dad's knuckles whitened around his pen. "You're destroying this family over money, Sable." I met his gaze, unflinching. "You destroyed it the day you taught us that love comes with receipts." A flash of something crossed his face. Not remorse, not yet, but a crack. Patrick, sitting quietly behind Dawn, spoke for the first time. "She's right," he said. His voice was steady, the tone of a man who'd spent weeks reading documents in silence. "If these papers are accurate, you both crossed a line. I work in finance. Hiding a co-trustee's role is illegal." Dawn whipped toward him. Patrick, not you too. He held up a hand. I'm not choosing sides, Dawn. I'm choosing the truth. That shut her down faster than any argument could. Mom turned to Mr. Lane, desperate. Tell her this is complicated, that families handle things differently. He adjusted his glasses. Families do, he said carefully, but the law does not. Your daughter is legally correct. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. I took a slow breath and slid the final page across the table, a formal notice drafted the night before. This is my decision, I said. I'm stepping down as co-trustee, but I'm not waiving any rights to restitution. You can keep managing the ruins, but I'll make sure the law sees every brick. Dad frowned. You're bluffing. Vanessa spoke before I could. She's not. The paperwork to dissolve the trust is already prepared. If repayment isn't received within 30 days, liquidation begins. Dawn's eyes widened. You'd sell my house? No, I said softly. The court would. Actions have consequences, remember? Mom's lip trembled. You're tearing us apart. I'm setting boundaries, I said. You just don't like where the walls go when they're not around Dawn. The meeting broke like glass. Mom stood first, muttering about ungrateful children. Dad gathered the papers he hadn't read, his pride shaking more than his hands. Dawn stayed seated, staring at the trust binder as if it were a mirror showing her something she didn't want to see. Patrick lingered. As the others left, he turned to me. If you need a witness, he said quietly, I'll testify. You deserve justice. For the first time all day, I smiled. Thank you, but I think the truth will speak loud enough. He nodded, then followed his wife out. Vanessa exhaled. You handled that beautifully. I didn't handle it, I said. I ended it. Sometimes those are the same thing. I gathered my documents, slid them into my bag, and stood. On the way out, I paused at the door and looked back at the table. The empty coffee cups, the half-folded tissue Marla had used to blot her eyes, the thin sunlight cutting across the papers. This was the battlefield where decades of silence had finally made noise. As we stepped into the hallway, Vanessa asked, Do you think they'll pay? No, I said, but they'll lose more if they don't. The elevator doors opened, mirrored surfaces catching our reflections. For the first time, I liked the woman staring back, not polished, not perfect, but whole. Where to now? Vanessa asked. I smiled faintly. Home, then the courthouse, if necessary. The doors closed, sealing the noise of their excuses behind me. I didn't need revenge. I needed truth, and the truth was already halfway free. The letter from the probate office arrived 3 weeks later. White envelope, bold seal, the kind of mail that doesn't apologize for existing. Inside, one clean paragraph confirmed it. The trust has entered liquidation due to unpaid maintenance fees and unresolved breaches of fiduciary duty. I didn't smile. There was no victory in it, just gravity, the kind that finally pulls truth down where it belongs. By then, I'd already sold Grandma Mildred's seaside shop. The realtor had called it quaint but unprofitable. He didn't know it had been a sanctuary. I kept one thing before the papers went through, the shop's hand-painted sign that read Second Wind. It hung now above my apartment window, a reminder that rebuilding isn't always revenge. The sale gave me breathing room, enough to pay off my student loans, invest in my firm, and, more importantly, build a future unchained from my parents' ledgers. Still, the fallout was merciless. 2 months after the meeting, the house, Dawn's house, went to auction. I didn't attend, but Vanessa did. She texted me afterward. Sold at $1.06 million. After back taxes and penalties, nothing left for your parents. I read it twice, set the phone down, and whispered, They did it to themselves. The next day, the phone calls began again. Mom first, her voice shaking. Are you happy now, Sable? You took your sisters home. I didn't take it, I said quietly. The truth did. You ruined this family, she cried. No, I said. You just finally ran out of ways to hide what you ruined yourself. Then I hung up for the last time. Dad's message came next. Not a call, but a voicemail that began formal and ended bitter. You could have handled this privately. Your grandmother would be ashamed. You always were dramatic. I deleted it halfway through. He'd mistaken shame for justice his whole life. The silence that followed was strangely peaceful. No guilt-tripping texts, no emotional blackmail disguised as checking in, just space. But space can be loud. Some nights I still woke up hearing echoes of old arguments. My mother's, we did our best. My father's, don't make a scene. Dawn's, you always think you're the victim. Except now, I had proof that I hadn't imagined the pattern, and that mattered more than sleep. Patrick reached out a month later. He'd moved out of the apartment he and Dawn had rented after the house sold. His message was short. She's learning, slowly. She's working part-time now. It's messy, but she's trying. I wrote back, "Good. Some lessons only stick when they hurt enough." Then, after a pause, I added, "Tell her I don't hate her. Just the version of her that let this happen." He replied with a single line, "That version's fading." It was the closest thing to peace I could hope for. Weeks blurred into a kind of quiet rebuilding. My firm grew. Word spread fast when people realized I didn't just balance numbers, I enforced accountability. Clients liked that. Integrity became my currency. Still, there were moments when it all hit me. The absurdity of it. My parents had spent years teaching me to save, to plan, to be responsible, and yet they'd gambled away ethics for the illusion of love. The final straw came one rainy Friday when an envelope slid under my apartment door. No return address, just my name in handwriting I hadn't seen since childhood. Inside was a folded letter. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and salt. At the top, from the desk of Mildred Hartwell. I froze. The date was from 2 months before she died. The signature was hers. Sharp, strong. Sable, if you ever find yourself reading this, it means what I feared came to pass. Your parents love you both, but they confuse love with control. They will take your steadiness as permission. Don't let them. Fairness isn't rebellion. It's repair. You have my full blessing to fight for what's right, even if they call it unkind. You're my legacy, not the money. You. Love, Grandma M. My throat tightened. For all their schemes, my parents had never managed to silence her. She'd seen it coming, all of it. That night, I sat at my desk with her letter beside the trust binder, both lit by the same lamp. I opened a fresh document on my laptop and began typing. Not a lawsuit, not another letter, a plan. I titled it the Hartwell Scholarship Fund. It would use the remainder from the shop sale, small but enough, to fund tuition for young accountants from Savannah who'd grown up overlooked, underpraised, or underestimated. People like me. For the first time, I felt proud of what I was building, not just what I'd survived. The next morning, as sunlight stretched across the desk, I realized I didn't hate my family. I didn't love them either, not in the same way. What I felt was distance, measured and deliberate. Sometimes survival looks like silence. I deleted the last voicemail from Mom, archived the legal files, and finally, closed the folder marked Family Trust. It was done. Outside, Savannah hummed with life again. Markets reopening, waves lapping against the piers, the faint smell of rain on brick. I whispered to the city, to Grandma, to myself. Fairness isn't rebellion, it's repair. And this time I believed it. The ocean looked different that morning. Not calmer, just honest. Gray light on the water, seagulls tracing loops that never closed. Savannah had a way of mirroring you back. The peace, the ache, the things you were still trying to forgive. I walked along the pier with a thermos of coffee and the old shop key from Second Wind on my wrist. Not because I needed it, but because it felt like a compass. I'd spent the last few weeks finishing what Grandma started. The Hartwell Scholarship Fund had gone live, small but real. One student already accepted, a shy girl from Tybee who'd written, "My family says accounting is boring, but I think truth needs guardians too." That line stayed with me, because that's all I'd ever wanted to be, a guardian of what was fair. It had been almost 4 months since the trust dissolved. My parents hadn't spoken to me since the auction, and Dawn's last message had been a single bitter text. "You'll never understand what you've done to this family." Maybe she was right, or maybe she still didn't understand what they'd done to me. Then, one quiet Thursday, a knock at my door. When I opened it, Dawn stood there. No camera-ready hair, no designer bag, just jeans, a wrinkled jacket, and a face that looked like it had finally run out of defenses. "Can I come in?" she asked. I hesitated. "If you're here to fight, don't waste the drive." She shook her head. "I'm here to not fight." So I let her in. We sat at my kitchen table, the one I'd bought used, sturdy enough to handle the weight of old truths. She stared at the mug in her hands before saying, "I got a job." "Good," I said carefully. "Bookkeeping at a small firm downtown." That caught me off guard. "You, bookkeeping." She almost smiled. Guess karma has a sense of humor. We both laughed. Soft, cracked, but real. Then she went quiet again. "Patrick left," she said finally. "He said he needed space. He's tired of the way I handle things." I didn't gloat, I didn't comfort, I just listened. She took a breath. "Mom and Dad, they're not talking to me either. They blame me for everything that happened. Said I should have convinced you to back down. That's not your job, I said. Maybe not, but I didn't stop them either. That landed heavy. She looked up, eyes glassy. I didn't know they used your inheritance. I swear I didn't. But part of me thinks I didn't want to know. Because deep down, I liked being the favorite. There it was, the confession I'd wanted for years, and somehow it didn't feel triumphant, just human. I nodded slowly. It's easier to stay blind when the light points at you. Dawn let out a small, broken laugh. You sound like Grandma. That made me smile. Good. Someone should. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. I found this in Mom's dresser after they moved into the condo. It had your name on it. Inside was a faded photograph. Grandma Mildred sitting on the porch of Second Wind, sunlight catching her silver hair, a younger me beside her with a calculator in one hand and ice cream in the other. On the back, written in blue ink, "Someday you'll balance more than books, sweetheart." I stared at it, the edges soft from time, the message sharp as ever. Thank you, I said quietly. Dawn nodded. I'm sorry, Sable, for all of it. I believed her, maybe not entirely, but enough. You can't undo what they did, I said, but you can do better. She wiped her eyes. I'm trying. That's all that counts. Before she left, she looked around my apartment. Modest, warm, full of quiet rather than emptiness. You seem happy, she said. I am, I admitted. Not all the time, but enough. She smiled, small and tired. You were always stronger than the rest of us. No, I said, just finally unwilling to be weaker. A week later, I saw my parents by chance, at the grocery store, of all places. Mom froze by the fruit section, her hand hovering over a pile of apples. Dad looked older, slower, his certainty dimmed. Sable, Mom breathed, like my name still meant guilt. I didn't walk away, not this time. Dad spoke first. We got your scholarship announcement, he said. You're using the shop money? Yes, I said. A pause, then quietly. That's good. She'd like that. Mom's eyes flicked down. We didn't mean to hurt you. I know, I said, but you did. She nodded once, then reached for a bag of oranges, something to do with her hands when words ran out. As I left, she whispered, You're still our daughter. I never stopped being, I said. You just stopped seeing it. And I walked away, not angry, not vindictive, just free. That evening, I returned to the pier where it had all begun, the same salt wind, the same restless tide. I held Grandma's photo against the railing until the edges curled in the breeze. The horizon blurred gold and gray, the in-between colors of survival. I thought about how fairness and forgiveness weren't opposites. They were siblings, like Dawn and me, different, but bound by what we learned the hard way. Some inherit money, some inherit wounds. I inherited both, and the will to turn them into something that mattered. I pulled out my phone and opened a new post draft for my firm's blog. Families can hide 1,000 truths, but numbers never lie. Every time you demand transparency, you're not starting a war, you're ending one. Don't confuse peace with silence. Sometimes peace is the noise you make when you finally say, enough. I hit publish, slid the phone back into my pocket, and let the ocean answer with its own applause. Endless, indifferent, forgiving. This was what freedom sounded like.